Joining me now for a look at the day's markets action is Andrew Padoa from Sasfin Wealth. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Now, Andrew, all eyes are on the Fed minutes that are out later tonight. They'll give us some clues into the thinking behind the central bank's first rate cut in about 4 years. What have you made of trade ahead of these minutes?
So I think last Friday we saw the strong payrolls data that was released, and I think that probably reduces the need to keep cutting rates at that 50 basis points that we saw in September. They did signal that future rate cuts will be dependent on inflation and dependent on the labor market. So I think markets are, taking a bit of a wait and see approach. Like I said, we had the labor data last Friday, which was strong. We've got inflation coming out tomorrow. So let's see what the Fed does going forward, but I don't think they'll keep their 50 basis points cuts, going forward for the next few months. It'll probably be about 25 basis points like what we saw in South Africa.
And I was about to say, trade has been pretty choppy this week. One day markets are up, the next day markets are down. Are we just seeing, that wait and see approach ahead of those key prints, including the Fed minutes that are out tonight, as well as that inflation print out tomorrow?
Yes, I think that's fair. If we head to the east, they've had their own issues as well. The China stimulus rally kind of faded pretty quickly the last 2 days. So it's been a rough 2 days in China. Lack of details on the stimulus is likely to be the reason for what we've seen the last 2 days, the decline in the Chinese markets. It doesn't mean more stimulus packages aren't on the way. I see the Chinese finance minister's kind of set up a meeting for Saturday. He's holding a briefing. But there's a lot of other factors outside of China that that can influence their stock market performance. We've got US elections. We've got global trade tariffs, probably being the two main ones. So investors in China probably just need to be a little bit cautious at this stage.
We'll get into those tariff issues in just a bit. But is what we're seeing playing out in China, the stimulus rally running out of steam, what is affecting our markets, the JSE?
Yes, it has. So we've seen some of the resources. So, for example, Kumba Iron Ore. Our resources companies rely heavily on China to buy these resources, and so we've seen, a bit of a fallback with our resources the last couple of days. Looking today, slightly better. Well, Billiton's basically flat. Banks were down, like you mentioned earlier, but First Rand went ex-div, so it makes sense that First Rand's down roughly 3% for the day.
Now, how concerned are you about those, that tit for tat in terms of tariffs that's playing out between between the EU and China, considering that China has just hit back, slapping tariffs on European brandy?
Yeah, I see it's for brandy as well as for EVs and other things like that. I think genuinely, I think it's silly. We're all trying to get inflation rates down around the world. This has been our challenge for the last 2-3 years, is inflation's been so high, interest rates have been so high. We need inflation to come down and interest rates will follow. But these trade tariffs that is being implemented, they're inflationary. They have the potential to make it harder for inflation and interest rates to come down around the world. Before COVID, most of the world would get around a fire and sing Kumbaya. We were all friends. But since COVID, supply chain disruptions, we're redesigning supply chains. We were kind of very, I wouldn't say selfish, but when it came to the vaccines, it was, we weren't friends anymore. It was all about ourselves. So countries are isolating themselves. We've got Trump coming in maybe in the next few weeks. So yeah, I don't think these trade tariffs are good for the world at all.
Really interesting to see how the world, particularly the East as well as the West, are moving towards this protectionist wave just off the back of COVID and the increasing geopolitical tensions, Andrew.
Yeah, it is. And we've seen companies kind of rejig their supply chains as a result. So, before COVID, a lot of people were manufacturing things in China because it was cheap, it was efficient, which is great for your margins if you're a New York company that manufactures something. But if COVID comes along and you can't get your goods out of China, it means nothing. So now we're kind of refiguring this out around the world. So you're seeing iPhones being manufactured in India. You're seeing, I think, Tesla's building factories in Mexico as well. We're seeing TSMC in Taiwan, building factories in Phoenix, Arizona. So yeah, a lot of this kind of stuff going on in the world where we're just relooking at supply chains. Maybe you've still got your big manufacturing base in China, but you're hedging your bets and you're spreading out factories around the world just in case we have another COVID, supply chain disruption.
Andrew, so much happening on the macro front that we didn't even get to touch on some of the local news out today. But before I let you go, what are you hanging your hat on today? What's your stock pick?
My stock pick, okay. So my stock pick today is Novo Nordisk. They're the Danish drug company that have the GLP-1 drugs. It's called Wegovy. So these are the obesity drugs that people are taking and losing up to 20% of their body weight in a year with minimal side effects. I know there's a couple of other pharmaceutical companies that are now trying to come up with these drugs because they see how big this market could be. But Novo Nordisk has a 20-year head start, and I think they're on their third version of this drug. So there's been a lot of R&D, trial and error along the way. So I think it's going to be hard for people to catch them. The shares have come under a bit of pressure the last 3 months, but this weakness, it looks like an attractive entry point.
Listen, I personally know because I know a lot of people that use Ozempic. So yeah,
Okay.
that market really, really big. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us and taking us through the day's markets action. That was Andrew Padoa from Sasfin Wealth.